Shall we make a start? Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks again, and very happy to see you again. So this is the second day of our UKTR Bootcamp. And as you will see, there is some difference if you were here yesterday. First of all, the chat function is now ready. So you can just click on the chat button on your screen of Zoom and then just type in there whatever questions or things you want to raise, or alternatively, please feel free to use the Q&A as yesterday. And we will try to answer the questions either during the presentation or we'll type up the answers for you. Okay, and today we will have quite a few more speakers and guests with us today. Sorry. If allow me to introduce them for you. First of all, we have our usual friends from Soil Association. We have Sonia, Andy. I'm not sure if Sam is joining us. If not, Sonia and Andy will be delivering the presentation for you today. We also have Annabelle and Maggie from ZSL, the SPOTT team, and Mary Fanzo from WRI, the Open Timber Portal, and we have Grace from BVRio. And on your screen now, you should see an agenda for today. As usual, we hope to have the first part of the morning to start with Soil Association on reporting, key components of reports with examples and Q&As as continued from yesterday. And then we will have Robbie from Tradelink, Amelia and Lee from DHH Panel Products to share with us their own company experiences and examples of due diligence. And then we have SPOTT just before break on their very useful toolkit. A quick break at 12, and then in the afternoon, we will have BVRio and Open Timber Portal. Allow me to do a very quick summary of what happened yesterday. So yesterday we had Deanne from OPSS joined us to cover a little bit of her enforcement position of UKTR. So first of all, the 3 steps of due diligence is needed on timber from both high and low risk countries, no matter what the risk level it is. For example, France, Germany, USA. The 3 steps of due diligence is needed. And also on products with FSC or PFSA or other certification claims, the 3 steps is needed. So you cannot say that our product is from an FSC certified supplier, from FSC certified forest concession, from a very low risk country. That's it. This is my due diligence. No, that no longer works, unfortunately. And the 3 steps also needed if your timber came to the UK via EU. So it could be timber from Cameroon that you bought via an Italian supplier. Yes, you will need to also carry out the 3 steps of due diligence for that product. Literally, it is needed, except, so there's only one exception, if the timber has valid FLAGT license directly exported from Indonesia to the UK. So that is only exception for UKTR due diligence. You do not need to do due diligence if that is what you have. Secondly, supporting documentations. So we've heard from Deanne, Andy, and our guest speakers yesterday that generally you will need to have those 3 sets of different documentation. So number 1, documents to prove the declared supply chain and the country. Evidence of your checking the validity of your FSC or PFSC certification claim on the product. So that is where you use the FSC database or PFSA database to confirm the credibility of the claim, etc., etc., and downloading FSC audit report, going through the report for any major non-compliances, which Sonia will be sharing an example with us later. Third, you will need documentation to prove legal harvesting in that declared country. Or, if applicable, valid and credible certification can help to prove legal harvest, but there's condition attached, which again, we will be hearing more from Sonia and Andy today. And do remember all those documentation, if they are not in English, you will need to have a translation ready, not every single bit on the document, but just key component need to be translated. So upon your enforcement visit or upon your audit by Soil Association, you can show them that you have tried your best to understand the content of the documentation, that you have verified the content of the documentation. And also remember, supporting documentation forms a part of your 3 steps of due diligence. So please do not just supply a pile of documentation to Deanne and her team or to the auditors. You need to somehow explain how those documentation have been used. Also, we briefly touched upon the situation in Russia and Ukraine. For Russia, impossible to reduce risk for negligible at this moment. For Ukraine, it is still possible, as mentioned by Deanne. However, extra mitigation will need to be carried out in line with the European position paper, which we will send a link to you following this webinar. And today, the first thing from Soil Association, Sonia will going through with us exactly how can we present or demonstrate our actions, findings, conclusions of the 3 steps of due diligence. Because remember, that is the first thing auditor and enforcement team will look at to understand how you have carried out your due diligence. And later on, Robbie from Tradelink and Amelia and Lee will also be sharing us their own way of reporting, how they present their due diligence to a third party, which is all very useful. So that is a quick summary for from yesterday. Now I pass on the floor to Sonia. You ready, Sonia?
Hi, hello everyone. Yes, so Andy and myself will take you through a quick whirlwind tour of basically what happens at a RPP audit so that you can have some insight into what sort of questions we are looking to answer when assessing the evidence that's supplied to us for an audit. And I'll also go through some examples of due diligence reports for so they'll be presented in a couple of different formats so that you can see the different ways that this might be presented. So there'll be some good examples and some bad examples, and I'll try to explain exactly why basically what information we're looking for. So at an RPP audit, what we do is we receive your summary of all of your operator sales in the previous year, and we select a couple of samples to check your due diligence activities based on those samples. The RPP audit isn't an enforcement audit. We are working almost as a consultant in a way in order to help you improve your systems. It's quite a good way of keeping abreast of any changes or any kind of areas of development any kind of recent risks that might be the enforcement bodies might be focusing on based on any NGO reports or things like that. So we do tend to select samples from high-risk supply chains or ones where we've identified previous issues in your due diligence to sort of check on improvement. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you the RPP audit checklist to show you exactly what we are trying to answer when assessing your submission. The checklist follows the 3 points of the UKTR legislation, so A, B, and C, which are information gathering, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. The report is sort of outlined by kind of step by step. So the first step is gathering specific information that you're required to by the legislation. The second step is assessing country level, species level, and supply chain level risks. The third very important step is the initial risk conclusion based on your assessment of these specific risks and anything else that you might have come across in your research. This is very important. You need to, what we often see is a sort of lack of thorough enough risk assessment, kind of just presenting, for example, a certified product as low risk, but certification is a risk mitigation. Certification works as a way to mitigate risks. So you can only use it if you can specifically link it to a risk that you've identified. So you assess your risks, you present your initial risk conclusion. If the risk is negligible, you do not need to go on to risk mitigation because there aren't any risks to mitigate. However, if you've identified any risks in this area, I'll go through these bits in a bit more detail in a minute. I'm just kind of providing a summary to start with. Then you need to identify specific activities that you can undertake to mitigate the risks that you've identified. And those mitigation measures need to be linked to the risks. And you need to sort of explain in a narrative in what way the risk mitigation activities cancel out the risks that you've identified. And then you need to present, if you've done any risk mitigation, you need to present a risk conclusion to show how the risks have been mitigated to negligible, and therefore you're allowed to place the product on the market. So for any new operators on the call, don't worry too much if this all seems like quite a lot in the first year or two of your RPP audits. It's been quite a long kind of process to get the timber market in the EU up to speed with how we're doing things right now, as the UKTR now has resulted in a lot more companies being operators and needing to request this information from suppliers who have never had to deal with requests for this level of information before. It will take some time for the the market to kind of catch up on this as well. But yeah, so the first thing that we will be checking at the audit is whether you have a policy in place to allow you to meet your obligations under the UKTR, whether you have a dedicated person in charge or a team who's responsible for conducting this due diligence. You obviously can't do this if you don't have dedicated resource to do this properly. So this will vary depending on how it fits in with the general structure of your company. You might have a dedicated compliance officer, or it might be part of your sales team's responsibility. We'll also want to see that the people who are responsible for doing this due diligence have been trained. And this is just a kind of high-level way of highlighting any significant gaps in you complying with the information gathering, risk assessment, or risk mitigation processes in your due diligence. We'll also be checking your, just doing a kind of very brief snooping on perhaps your website or your sales documents, just to make sure you're not potentially misleading your customers by making statements about what the RPP is about. So it's not going through an RPP audit process does not mean that you are UKTR compliant. It's just so yeah, we always do our audits based on a sample. It does not guarantee that your company is basically TTF membership and the RPP auditing does not provide this sort of level of guarantee. So we also check that you're not sort of misunderstanding that point, if that makes sense. So the key information that you need to have access to and present to us for your audit is key information about your product, the supply chain map. A supply chain map isn't specifically required by the legislation, but it's just the easiest way for you to present us and also be sure yourself that you are fully aware of what your supply chain's doing, where things are coming from, where things are going through. If your material originates from a high-risk country, then you also need to map the supply chain back to the specific forest source. So either the forest, the concession, or the region, depending on what specific risks there are in the source country that you're looking at. Moving on to the risk assessment, these risks are specifically mentioned in the text of the legislation. So you need to assess whether the country you're sourcing from or any of the countries in the supply chain are high risk due to levels of corruption in the country. You need to check whether illegal harvesting practices are highly prevalent in the area that the timber was harvested in. You also need to check whether there are any risks of the timber being used in funding armed conflict and whether there's a risk of the timber coming from a region with any EU or UN sanctions. There is a ton of resources available online to do this research. You're not kind of expected to have to hire expensive consultants or anything like that. This legislation has been in place for almost a decade now, and there's been many organizations working on public resources to allow you to do this. And yes, so if the source country presents a high risk of illegal logging, then you also are expected to collect some evidence to prove that the logging was done in compliance with local legislation. Then as part of the audit, we also want to check that you've actually tried to make sense of the documents that you've been sent by your supplier. What we don't want to see is just like a folder of documents and with no kind of narrative to them. That's sort of your job is to present it in a way that makes sense to the enforcement officer or preferably to us as well, if possible. So for example, if there's any obvious issues with the supporting documentation, for example, dates that don't make sense, like if you have an invoice from a sawmill to your factory that's dated later than the invoice for the logs that are that product was supposed to be made of, if that makes sense, or if the volumes don't quite add up, if the final product is if it is unlikely that the inputs used, so the logs that were used could have produced the final product that you've made. So we try not to spend ages with our calculators and our little, analytical hats on. We just kind of do a sense check. And if there's, it always helps if you show that you've done checks yourself. So if you've done any sort of analysis of volumes and any conversion factors that might be present in your supply chain, depending on what the product is, that's always good. So that's the country level risk. There's also some species level risk. So if there's any high value endangered species or any potential mixing with an endangered species with a less endangered one, or if it's basically, if we as an auditor are able to find information to show that there's some level of risk with a 10-minute search on Google, then we would expect you to have found that information too. We don't tend to go into too much detail because that's sort of your job, if that makes sense. We're not. And also what's important is to have links to the evidence that you're using to support any claims that you're making about the risk levels for any of these. A big one is supply chain level risks. So the more complex a supply chain, the higher the risk level is, because the risks will be quite different in a composite product that comes from a couple of different factories where there's several traders involved in various different countries. So that would be quite a high risk compared to maybe a sawmill that sources its timber from its own certified concessions and then exports it directly to you. In that there might still be other risks present in that sort of supply chain, but the supply chain level risks will be pretty low in that sort of scenario. And then the initial risk conclusion, you have to, if you've identified any risks in here, the risk will be non-negligible. And it is pretty much impossible to completely guarantee no risk at all present in your products, which is why the legislation states that you need to mitigate the risk to negligible rather than zero risk, because the world is too complicated for that, unfortunately. And then moving on to the risk mitigation section, you need to, any risk that you've identified, you need to select a corresponding risk mitigation measure. So for example, if you've identified that there is a risk that the factory you're using might be substituting materials with some other, with unknown or undocumented materials, your risk mitigation might look, it might look different depending on what the specific species are. So you might want to do a supplier visit, or you might want to hire someone to do a specific kind of audit. So an important note about using supplier audits as risk mitigation, they have to be documented, and it has to be clear exactly what risks you are looking to mitigate by doing a supplier audit. It has to be clear what evidence you've looked at and how that evidence has allowed you to reach a conclusion that the risk is not present in that supply chain. Or if the species that you're looking at could be substituted with something else, you might look at something like testing to verify that it's not been mixed with something else than what you've been told it is. TDUK are available for any advice about testing or anything like that that you might be thinking about for your supply chain. So yeah, you've got plenty of support there. So don't be too worried about having to reinvent the wheel or anything like that. So a big one is using certification as a risk mitigation. What we don't want to see is a presentation of your due diligence that states our product is FSC certified, therefore it's low risk. You have to specifically say in what way certification addresses a specific risk you've identified in your supply chain. Also, another thing is it doesn't really matter if the factory you're sourcing from is certified. If the product that you buy isn't sold to you as certified, so if it doesn't carry a full certification claim and the code of your supplier, it's basically your supplier's certification status doesn't count, as we sort of touched on, or quite, yeah, Sam talked about the place of certification and due diligence yesterday. And finally, in your narrative, we want to see that you've linked your mitigation measures to the risks and you are now confident that those measures have been successful. And your final risk conclusion is negligible. If you can't get to negligible, then you shouldn't, then you cannot place the product on the market. There are some other things that we look at as part of the RPP audit. So, I mean, this due diligence does need to be carried out before placing the product on the market. We also check for whether or not you've taken account into any previous findings into account in your due diligence going forward. And we also ask if your due diligence activities have resulted in you rejecting any potential suppliers. It's sort of it's a way of seeing whether the due diligence system kind of works, because if you have rejected a supplier based on your due diligence activities, it shows that it's properly kind of embedded in your, I mean, obviously it depends on, you might be very lucky and be sourcing either low risk or easily mitigatable risked products. And yeah, so this is the RPP checklist. The findings are detailed on the cover page, and most of the findings are sort of, we only seek to address them in the following year's audit to check that you've made any improvements that might be required following your previous audit. So now let's look at some examples. So this is the, some of you might be familiar with this form. It's also called, sometimes called Tool A for, it's part of the RPP, older RPP toolkit. And the Tool A basically mirrors the OPSS's audit checklist completely. So let's look at what this is. So it's not, so the product is Indonesian plywood. Okay, Indonesia, as we know, Indonesia is the only country to have a ratified FLEGT licensing system in place. So hopefully this should be a fairly easy one to do. So it's Indonesian plywood. The species are identified in here. So at an audit, we would also be expecting to see the supporting documents that are summarized in this. There's a FLEGT certificate. And okay, so there's a FLEGT certificate. However, in the complexity of the supply chain section, you can see that the timber actually came through Germany. And if we look at this FLEGT certificate code, it's got DE at the end here, which means that it was issued to Germany. And those of you who were at yesterday's boot camp will know that the UK competent authority cannot verify FLEGT certificates that were issued to any other European state. And it's the same for any, so any FLEGT certificate must be issued to the country that basically it can only be used to waive due diligence if the FLEGT certificate was issued to the country that you're based in, so the UK, because then it is verified by the UK competent authority. So the problem with this is that the report isn't exactly complete. There's some pretty big gaps in here because there was a misunderstanding of how FLEGT works, basically. So hopefully that makes some sense. Now, let's look at a second example using TTF's due diligence toolkit. It's a pretty snazzy PDF thing with a good kind of flow chart to make sure that you don't miss any of the steps. So what are we looking at here? It's softwood from manufactured in Germany. So supporting documents include list of products purchased. Not entirely sure what that means. Anyway, so it's manufactured in Germany. So the timber is from Poland, and it's FSC 100%. So what we would want to see here is the invoice with the claim to prove that it was actually bought as certified. The report isn't that detailed. I mean, it is a pretty simple supply chain. However, the list of supporting documents does not include the invoice to demonstrate that the product is actually bought as certified. Yeah, I mean, just saying, yeah. So then this is the risk assessment of the specific bits that are required by the legislation. So your CPI. I mean, there have been some NGO reports about Polish forestry in the past years. So I'm not entirely sure that NA is the right response here. So there's also mention here of factory visits, but for this to count towards your due diligence, there would need to be some sort of evidence of what's actually looked at those factory visits. Yeah, and again, FSC certification can only be used to mitigate risks where the product is certified. So you would want to see that invoice to see that it actually applies to this product. Yeah, so it's pretty sparse on the information side. Oh, another favorite of mine is we've known this supplier for a really long time, so they're low risk. It doesn't really work like that. It's a good sign that you've got a good and trusting relationship with your supplier. Obviously, that's not a problem, but that's not really objective evidence to show that there isn't any risk present in your supply chain. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sort of running low on time, so I'm just going to move on to the next one. So what is this? So now we're looking at an example of pine from Sweden, bought as certified. Supporting documents are listed here. So a supplier questionnaire, the invoice, so that's great. We'll be able to verify the claim, packing list, and the customs entry document. Yeah, Yeah, so this is all the information gathering section. A supply chain map. It looks like there's a field visit report in here, so that's good. We would be able to verify what was actually checked at that field visit. And then here, all the risks are assessed, and importantly, there's some sources of evidence to support the conclusion of negligible risk. Especially if you're making a claim about, say, a country where the risk might vary depending on the region that you're looking at. It's good to have some sort of source of information that supports that. So yeah, as you can see, all of these risks have been determined as negligible. So yeah, no risk mitigation is required for this, and this looks like a good level of information for us to be able to confirm that the product was low risk or not. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I think I got 3 minutes left to look at the FSC database. So, so I was also asked to quickly just show how you might be able to check an FM report on the FSC database. It's for any of you who have had to deal with the FSC database in the past, you'll be aware that it's changed significantly. They're experiencing some technical issues and are working on an improved database. So let's look at an example. Let's look at Brazil. So what you would do is, if you had your supplier's code, you would type in the code, which is this, the certification body's initials, the certificate type, so forest management, and then the code. And then that will take you, you'll be able to drill through to the certificate detail page. I do sympathize with any non-English speakers who have tried to navigate this since it's changed. What does drill through mean? Anyway, it is a requirement of FSC for the forest management reports to be published. So these are available within the certificate detail page under documents. And if we click through on this, it is in Portuguese. I can't translate the PDF into English, but you can use Google Translate on your phone, perhaps as a tool to help you navigate this. So what you're looking for here is non-compliances. This looks like, so it's information. You might want to look at that too, depending on what you're trying to find out. What is this? So I think that might be HCVs. I mean, hopefully the word for non-compliance isn't too dissimilar in Portuguese to results. Yes, let's look at the results. Right, so this looks like these are your non-compliances. So what you can do is just copy paste this into Google Translate. So yeah, it can be a little bit faffy, but it's also kind of, if you've got some time, and it can be kind of interesting as well to delve into it, to understand your supply chain a little bit better. So as you can see, there is a number of non-compliances, which isn't unusual for an FSC forest management certificate. It is a process of continuous improvement. But yeah, I think car. Mayor probably means major car. So that's what you want to just quickly scan for. Minor, minor, observation, minor. So yeah, oh, there's a major car. Anyway, I think we're over the time. So a lot of these will be available in English as well as in the local language. So you don't always have to rely on Google Translate quite so much. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions that might have.
Thank you, Sonia. Sorry, just before we dive into the questions, back on the report. So I guess the key component, the key word to look for is non-compliances, major non-compliances, and is there a need to download all the FM report if the timber is from a very low risk country like FAC farm in France?
So there isn't a specific need to download anything. It's really just a source of information for the operators to use when checking what risks there might be. So if it is a FSC mix product, then you might want to check. So yeah, I think we sort of touched on this yesterday, that controlled wood certification is the main area where these risks are also present. So if you're buying a mixed product, then it won't be purely from FSC certified forests. There will be some FSC controlled wood in there, and that might come from any number of places. So if it's a French certificate holder, they might be buying controlled wood certified timber from another country, or they might just be putting some timber from forests around them through their own due diligence. So it depends on what you're looking at and what the risks are.
Okay, so perhaps in summary, if it's a high risk country or contains controlled wood, then the recommendation is to definitely download and check the content for of those FIC reports. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's also what Deanne was saying yesterday, so we're gonna go with that.
Yep. Okay, and I think we do have a few questions in the chat box. Okay, let me just read it out. So from Brett, when asking for invoices to show the claims of certified timber being purchased, that kind of reports documents are only seen when trade has started. So how can we use such information in a pre-order? Does due diligence need to be carried out before purchases are made?
Yeah, that is a tricky one, because so you obviously won't have your own invoice from your supplier to demonstrate that, but you should be able to request some evidence for the supply chain from your supplier. If you're about to buy a load of product, it's likely that it's going to be already produced, or perhaps they might have regular suppliers. I mean, everyone has regular suppliers. So if they're able to provide you with some evidence to show that supply chain, and obviously companies can be quite touchy about sharing invoices and sales information and stuff like that, but it's entirely okay to redact any commercially sensitive information in an invoice. So you might want to mask the price, or
right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. And Andy, have anything to add, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we've been chatting. There's quite a bit. There's responses to that question in the chat, and it was just that if you haven't bought from a supplier before, so checking a purchase invoice isn't possible yet because it hasn't happened, then the company, if you're buying from a certified company, their products get scheduled will detail what products they're able to supply certified, the species in C's case, and sometimes in C's case, sometimes it's species. So you can see when they're able to supply it, and then it's just ensuring that you specify certified supply when you send a purchase order to them. check that it's been supplied as certified once it arrives. If you're certified yourself, then you shouldn't be loading it again, unloading it if you specify a certified purchase.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. And we have one more question, I think, from Philippa.
It's more a response to that question.
Okay, I see. Sorry, it's not really a question, right? Sorry, if anyone has any specific question, maybe better to use the Q&A so that we can maybe more easy for us to pick up the question, if that is okay. Thank you. Anything else we want to ask Sonia for now? Okay, all good. Katrina, thank you for the question. So we will send all the presentations to participants after this event. So the checklist and the template Sonia just presented, literally the checklist is developed by OPSS. So the template is on, you can download it on OPSS official UK government website. We will also share with you a link later. So the TTF toolkit is developed based on the OPSS template. It's just a little bit of with more information, references, resources, and the flowchart way of presenting the due diligence steps. It's a different way of presenting. Again, we will share a link to download the template later. Okay, thank you very much, Sonia and Andy. We will have another Q&A session in the afternoon. So anyone want to ask Sonia any further questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A. So now let's move on to our next speaker. So that's Amelia and Lee from DHH Panel. So Amelia and Lee will be sharing with us their own unique learning journey of conducting DD under UKTR and some very wonderful tips and guidances from their recent enforcement visit by OPSS. Over to you, Amelia. Thank you.
Hi, right, I'm just going to share my screen and figure out how I do that. There we go. Oh, don't want that. I'm just gonna. Right, can you see that? I'm just right, cool. Right, so we're from DHH, as Shao already said.
Everyone.
Yeah, morning. Yeah. So me and Lee, we both have dual roles. So I work in sales and compliance and Lee in shipping and compliance. Yeah. We started incorporating this into our jobs in like November time, and we did a lot. So we took over from Andrew, who used to do it, and we learned a lot. We had a lot of training with him, and then we've also learned a lot through doing webinars and stuff like this. We've been an operator since 2013 when EUTR came into place, so we've already had quite a lot of knowledge on it as a company. However, obviously, since the UKTR came in, we had to then do more. So we had the OPSS come visit in May. They came to us with 2 C88 customs entries. Yeah. They wanted to track back that shipment to our invoice, and then from the invoice, they wanted us to show them the mill and the due diligence system. We'll go into like how we do our due diligence system in a little bit, yeah. But they purchased boards from us. So of that, so we gave them the invoices of the shipment, and they wanted to purchase a board of every single thing that was on the invoice. So there was about 8 or 9 different thicknesses on one of the invoices, and they wanted each thickness on there. They were really helpful, and they gave us lots of pointers on extra things that we could do. And like, for instance, we've always done it that we just put on there, yep, I've checked where the forest is, and I've checked this and checked certain bits. And like with, I use the EU sanctions map quite a lot for checking sanctions, and that's a live link, so it does change. So when I originally reviewed the sources for Russia in November, there wasn't sanctions imposed on Russia, or there, but not like sanctions imposed to do with imports and exports. But obviously come to now, there is. So we spoke about how putting actual screen grabs in is a lot more helpful. Yeah. So some of the errors that we found that we needed to avoid, we don't always do them, but they were just errors that we thought of. some people I know haven't always linked the mitigation action to the original risk. So I know that some people have said, oh, these are the risks, but we've mitigated this, but not actually showed, okay, so the risk was legal rights to harvest and we've done this, but not coinciding them together. So putting them together can help the OPSS understand your thinking, but also you understand your thinking. Not evidencing checks on websites, like using links and making sure they have timestamps on them, even if it's just you writing the time on them, just to include it. Reading the FSC report fully. I know it's a long report, the Forest Management Audit reports and other reports. They are long, but reading them is so worth it, because if you come along and say to the OPSS, oh, yeah, we've got this report, it provides us loads of confidence, they're really happy, and they look 4 pages down and see that it's a major non-conformity, they're not going to be happy with that you're saying that's a mitigating action. Not utilising tools like Google search, literally type in illegal login in Russia, illegal login in like wherever it is, and then type in the people's names that are on the documents and stuff like that, just to see what comes up, because they're going to do the same. And make sure you evidence everything you do. It was helpful that we had them in front of us, so there were certain bits where Deanna was like, have you done this? And I was like, well, yeah. She was like, there's not actually evidence to show that you have. And it's like, well, I've said I have, but I hadn't had the proof to show that I'd done it.
Yeah, the more evidence, the better, really. Yeah, just make sure you link everything to your reports and make sure it's there. Yeah.
So some of our top tips were definitely speaking to NGOs such as NEPCONs. We did this with the Brazilian example I'll show in a bit. We were a bit of a gridlock with the supplier, because NEPCON was saying we needed a certain document. They were saying, no, that's not required in Brazil for an exotic species in the plantation. NEPCON was saying, no, it is. So I contacted NEPCON, spoke to them quite a bit. They were saying it is, but they wanted to check with their Brazilian counterparts in actually in Brazil, who then came back and said, no, the supplier is right, you don't need that, but you do need this. And then the supplier came back and said, yep, that's cool, we can give you that. And we were able to mitigate based on that. Ensuring translations are labelled. We've spoken about it loads on here, I use Google search now, not Google search, Google Translate. I used to do it quite annoyingly, type it all in until someone told me about you could use your phone to scan it. So now I scan it. I often take a screenshot of what I've scanned, email it to myself, and then I do it that I've put the key documents, like the key parts on the document, on there to say I've translated this, but I like to also put the full translation in as well, just as a bit of a backup to show, because otherwise if you don't translate the whole thing, you're not going to know what is the key parts and what isn't. Avoiding non-certified products from high-risk countries. Although obviously it's not a green flag having certification, it can help, and it's just installing that in buyers' minds that certification does help a lot, and it's not a green light, but it does really help. We've created an audit checklist, so whenever anyone goes out to the buyers, whenever they go out to visit, we've done it so they have a systematic approach and they can guide it, because if they can guide it, we can put that as an audit. So we've got it's not that many pages, but it's just a little booklet that they can run through. They can see what's going on. They can take photos, document it, and it says specifically what I need, and they can ask questions that we need to know. So then we can pull it in and just have it as another mitigating action. Chasing suppliers as much as possible. They're probably going to get annoyed with you, but I will. I'm pretty sure half the suppliers hate me now, but you have to keep chasing, otherwise it just won't get done, because UKTR isn't everybody's priority. Making money often is. So you're going to have to chase them. You're going to have to keep getting involved with them. And if they don't listen to you, go to the buyers. We've got the buyers involved, and we've also done it that one of our suppliers just wouldn't give us anything, so we just said we're suspending your account. Because when we were transitioning to EUTR, we were trying UKTR from EUTR, sorry. It was an EU company that they were sort of like, well, we don't have to give this to you. I was saying we do. They didn't want to give it to us, so we just stopped trading. And we've said that we won't trade with them until they give us the stuff. and educating everybody within the organisation how important it is. So making sure that it becomes part of your normal buying process, that anytime the buyers are like, oh, we're looking at this supplier, what do you need for UKTR? Getting them to ask that question before they even put on a PO, before they sort any contracts out. We've done it so that the minute they start thinking about a supplier, they talk to us, we do the mitigation actions and we do the due diligence, and then we say, right, that's fine, you can now go ahead and
go ahead.
Yeah, do your POs, do your contracts. So we've got 2 examples here of they're obviously the fake ones, we've put all our initials as the stuff, but so we've got a Brazilian one that actually isn't certified. It's 2 species, but it is one plantation, and it's a very short supply chain. And we've also got a Russian one that is for a single species, is certified, but we've now suspended it. These are the 2 that the OPSS audited, so obviously we've taken out the confidential stuff, but these are the 2. So let me just get them up. Right. So this is the layout that we have on the front. We've basically taken the TTF toolkit and other toolkits and merged it into one, because I like to waffle a bit, so I like a lot of space. So we've got a supply chain, and at the moment we've got a car, an environmental, that's show ambient, I don't know how to say it, but anyway, we've got a car, we just got the cars, environmental operating license and certificate of regularity. It's not certified. I said that I don't think the supply chain's full enough to reach a negligible conclusion. I think it needs more work. CPI score, using the CPI corruption perception index is so useful. It is a bit black and white. If you're 49, you're not good. If you're 50, you're good. It's a bit like that, but it is really helpful when just gauging it at the start, just to see how much of a low risk or high risk country you want to do it with. So I like to combine this report with NEPCON and sort of see how NEPCON are saying they are, see how CPI is, and then make a conclusion after that about how risk they are. So Brazil's 38. So I'm just going to say, we've got black is when I originally wrote the report in January 21, and then blue is February 22 when I reviewed it.
Review date,
yeah. So we've said here that it's only 38, it's not a very high score, more work needs to be done. Here it stayed the same. NEPCON gave it a score of 42, so we were a little bit happy with that, but still not completely happy. Wasn't updated. There was no sanctions imposed, and that was the link we used. So for going forward, when we review this, we'll put in actual screen grabs of what's going on, just so then they can actually see what it looked like at that time, because if you click on this now, it will show you now, even though it was the link that I put in January 21. We got a little bit there about the ban and the export of logs and left there from plantation. However, it doesn't affect us because we don't buy logs, and we do get from plantation. So if we did get logs, the ban wouldn't be matter.
No.
Put about the global conflict tracker, we use that quite a lot as well. We've said about how there is stuff going on in Venezuela next to it. However, it's not affecting timber exports and imports, so we're not too worried about that. It's from 2 species, pine and eucalyptus. They were both identified on the documents given by the supplier, and NEPCON have listed them as being exotic species, and so did they. The claims are consistent with the information declared. We didn't find any reports expressing concern that the species from that country were at risk of being mixed. And we also put about the UN Security Council country overview. They're really helpful. It's quite a condensed report, and they are often taken from NEPCON's reports, but they are still quite helpful if you don't want to sit there and read like the 80-page NEPCON report. And it lists them both as being the 2 main species within Brazil, so just providing a bit more confidence in the fact that it's from plantation, so it's already quite low risk. It's then the 2 main species, more low risk, and then so it also then a little bit about how within the country of Brazil there is some illegal logging in the natural forest, particularly the Amazon. However, we don't get it from there, we get it from plantations, which we then would put maps in as well to show where the plantations are, just providing us a bit more confidence. They're not CITES, so they're all okay there. We found nothing expressing any concerns about the supplier, the stakeholders involved with suppliers, and also anyone that's verifying the documents, so any of the governing bodies or anything like that. It's not at risk to being substitute, it's from a plantation, it's all quite good. You do feel that as you go through them, you are repeating yourself sometimes, but it's just getting the point across that it is. It's not a square flow across multiple tiers, so we don't think that there's going to be, because it literally does go plantation. The plantation is owned by the mill sends it to us. It's very low risk in our minds, and also based on the documents that provide. It's not certified, so we just skipped over that. We did then say we need to do more work because there wasn't enough. So this is when we then started speaking to the NEPCOM, and they said what we needed, because we were saying we're not happy that we've only got this, it doesn't prove as much for us. We then started speaking about dam fees, and basically they show the physical flow but also the financial flow of the timber, and they're really helpful for just showing them across the board. We then decided that based on this, we would do it that because it's a mitigating action, obviously it has to be done, carry on investigating. So we've done it that we've now got a table, it should be here. Obviously all these numbers are made up, it's either on 111, 222, but to show that basically this is a table that we do have, but it's sort of to show that every shipment we are doing our mitigating actions on, just to provide more confidence for us and also for the OPSS. We then said, based on all that work, we do feel that we're quite confident as long as we carry on getting the validity of the dam fees, like I said, we carry on getting them, we still feel confident, and as long as nothing changes, we'll be okay. We've then done the same for this year. When we reviewed it, we said we've had a whole year basically of dam fees, we feel very confident in them, and therefore we're quite happy with that one.
Yep.
So that's our Brazilian one. The Russian one's a bit longer, a bit more going on in Russia. So Russia, we've been dealing with them a lot longer, so it's actually got 3 review dates. Obviously you can see February and March are very close together because they decided to have all their stuff go on. So yeah, quite a lot of business. So I happily reviewed it in February and then had to review it all again in March. So it's the same again, supply chain, I've got a land lease agreement, a forest deck, got a little bit of stuff, got chain of custody and forest management codes throughout the whole thing. Not happy though still that it's not completely fulfilled. CPI scores, 28, it's a low score. 30, it's gone up a bit, but it's still quite low. 29, it drops again, but it's still low. NEPCON gave it quite a low score of 6 out of 100, and I put about the risks. I put about the military, the armed conflicts that's coming in and like they've started. This is where the OPSS said like screen grabs are really important, because here I've put there's no sanctions imposed on Russia, there's no sanctions imposed on Russia, there's now sanctions imposed. Having the screen grabs, because if I click on that link there that I put in then, it's going to take me, let me do it. It's going to take you to the EU sanctions map for Russia, but it's got all about their different sanctions, so it's not valid. So putting it in, although obviously she knew that there wasn't stuff going on and she knew what I meant, having a screen grab would be really helpful because it is a live link. We then spoke about the exportation of unprocessed logs and how that was going to be banned, and a bit about that. So the product is one species. It was on all of the documents, and I did the same with the documents here. I went through, translated them. We used to do so much with Russia that you get to the point now, I couldn't tell you what the words mean, but I can see what they like. I can speak them, but I can recognise them. So I can I know what birch means. I know what land lease agreement means. I know what forest deck means. I know all that. You just pick it up after a while.
Like, don't you? Yeah.
NEPCON did highlight in some cases there is risk of stuff being substituted. However, on their list, birch plywood wasn't listed, or birch wasn't listed as one of them species. We also believe, because it's a prevalent species, it's in their top. Russia is the top country that has birch, like they got the most, and it's 14% of their total volume, and it's also in their top 10 common species. So we thought it was really quite low risk on it being mixed with other species. And also we've been selling birch plywood for a long time. We know, well, we haven't really, but the company has. The company in general has a lot of knowledge about birch plywood. The suppliers we deal with has a lot of knowledge about birch plywood. If there was something wrong when it arrived in the country, we would know automatically, and that was when we'd then be like, right, we need to test that, we need to do something about that because it doesn't fit what we know birch plywood is like. It's not on CITES, and it's on the, we use the IUCN Red List quite a lot as well. They rank it out of how endangered it is, and it's of least concern, so they're really not worried about it. They know it's all good. They're still, again, checking it again each year to check it's not changed. We checked the stakeholders, everyone like that, that there's no reports about illegal activities within that supply chain. We feel it's at minimal risk. It's FSC certified, giving us more confidence. And because it's being checked and they're from checked sources, we think there's another low risk of illegal login. We also to ensure that the FSC flow works correctly, when checking the documents, checking that the claims are right, because it's no good someone saying, oh, this is FSC 100, this is FSC 100, but it then drops to FSC 70, but we're still selling it to you at FSC 100. That's breaking that chain, so it's not going to work. So it's making sure that the claim, no matter what it is the same throughout the whole supply chain. It's a short supply chain. It's grown and harvested in Russia, goes to the mill, comes to us. It's all kept Russia, UK. So this bit's about basically that they're FSC certified, that they're all, the claims and codes were all displayed on the supporting documents. We then checked that using the certificate search that Sonia was showing us earlier, and yeah, they're all active. We couldn't find any reports about it being bad. When we spoke to Deanna as well, she mentioned, because I said the problem is every time we check the FSC certificate, I'm printing it off and then I just replace it with the old one. So there's nothing to actually show you that I've checked it before. She said you don't even need to do that, just creating a table that shows, right, I checked the FSC on this date for this, I checked it on this date for this, and it was active or it wasn't active and anything like that. So here you can see that this was the mill AJT, they got suspended because of when Russia suspended everyone SSC. So in March when we checked it, it was no longer certified. Bit about where FSC then said they were going to, that forests could still keep their FMs, but everywhere else was losing theirs. Here we said basically it's some bits are good, but we're not completely happy. We're not happy that the supply chain isn't fulfilled. So here we said we wanted to focus on about the issues of the supply chain, but also the issues of trade and transport. So we moved on to getting way bills and assignment notes. These then validated the flow. They matched the previous documents provided, so such as the chain of custody codes throughout. They also matched the volumes and bits like that. And they've been signed and issued by the correct authority that we then checked using the NEPCON report, because that says a list of who's the issuing authorities. And then we also then did a check on how they were, if they were corrupt and if there was anything about corruption. We translated the documents and I labelled the documents with key annotations for what I thought was the best, but full translated documents I put in to be like, well, this is the document fully translated, but this is where I think is important information. We don't carry out testing on any of our products because they're all, we feel, quite low risk, and also we know so much about them that if there was any issues when they arrived, we would then go about testing. But with birch especially, we know what it is, we know what it looks like, we know what it feels like, we know what it should be. So we didn't feel it was necessary. Its whole FSC, when checking that, we also found the audit reports on the mill and also the forest management, which I've seemed to accidentally erase there, but there was the audit FM reports. They also gave us more confidence because in that it was they were basically saying it was all good, and there wasn't any. I think one of them might have had a minor non-conformity, but it was solved straight away before that anyway, so it didn't really matter. It was an FSC 100% claim, which was giving us more confidence. We then, each year we checked, there was more reports which showed more continuous checks, more confidence. Then it got suspended. And then it's the same, based on all of what we've done, we feel happy. Again here, happy for that year and happy for that year. However, we then said, because of it's lost its accreditation, which we were using as a mitigating action, it's now conflict timber. The FSC was saying it wasn't good. The TTF was saying it's not good. We've made the decision that we would suspend all our accounts and we would not begin trading again until everything has died down.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's our examples. And then it was just, if anyone had any questions, you guys stop sharing them.
Thank you so much, Amelia and Lee. That was fascinating. I'll keep putting down notes really great. So we have a long list of things that I think is fantastic. So number one, you mentioned a lot about just keeping a screen grab or screen print, right, of everything you've done, like be it a Google research on the supplier, just literally typing in the name of the supplier on Google to see what comes up, because that is also how OPSS will be using. You mentioned about contacting local stakeholders. So in your case, you contacted NEFCON, Brazil and Russia. So local stakeholders.
Contacting NEFCON is they will do some stuff for free and then they want you to pay. So use them as much as you can to get your free stuff. Yeah. And there was one, the person I was speaking to, she was like, yeah, we can help with that. I'll set up a meeting. Like, it's not good. Don't worry about it. And I was like, that's perfect. And then she said, oh, but we'll have to charge you for the meeting. And I said, well, can't you I just need you to answer one question. She answered the question. I went, I don't need the meeting anymore.
Yeah, well done. That's great. And thank you for sharing that. And then other things you've put, I noticed that you put in review dates, the days you review that due diligence, and you put those dates in your report. I think that's very useful. And you used a lot of very fantastic references, and you kept a record of those references. That's excellent. And yeah, there was so much fantastic things there. And your narratives, you put the narrative on every single checks, right? And the result of your checks. That's what's also what requested yesterday from OPSS. So I think that was a very great example. Thank you. Let me see if we have any questions for Amelia and Lee. Philippa, has the OPSS come back with the result for their timber testing?
Not yet, no, they haven't. They've so far they've given us a mini report to say basically they're happy with what's happened, what they've seen, but they want to then do a desk audit, and in that time they've got to do testing, and then once the testing's done, we'll get a full report back.
Okay, great. Any other questions do we have for Amelia and Lee about their due diligence? I have a question, if I may.
Sure. Yep.
The report is very useful. Do you compile such a report for every of your supplier or every supply chain?
Yes, so we do. We have a different report for every, so we follow the same format, but either way, we have a different report for every single supplier and supply chain. So if the supplier gives us 2 products, we've got, it's based off the mill more. So we do it for each mill that we use. We then do a supply chain and a report on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So every mill. So that's a lot to.
Yeah, we have a lot of folders.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then a question from Brett. Was any supplier tier 2 checks done for Russia? Maybe Brett, if you want to elaborate a bit more on the question, what do you mean by tier 2 checks? So I guess maybe Brett means those suppliers in Russia, you buy directly from them, so you have a direct control of
we generally buy through agents, UK agents.
Yeah.
So,
but we have had, although we buy through agents, before COVID, we used to still send people out there, and they'd often go with the agents and meet the suppliers. But yeah, it was all done, most of it through an agent.
Mostly through agent. I see. So do you send your request through the agent to the ration supplier?
Yeah, so we
right.
speak to the agent and then go that way. Occasionally they basically said, that's like, we asked the agent first. Most of them have the stuff ready and they're really helpful. Some of them just say, here's the mill, go talk to them.
Yeah.
Depends
on the mill, really, and the agent.
It depends on the mill, the agent, and also the one thing we found is our ones that we class as rest of world and not EU, they were really helpful. They are always on it. The EU ones have been a lot more difficult, and the EU ones have been the ones that we've had to actually suspend their accounts because they won't supply the information. And like they say, oh, no one else in the UK is asking for it. We're like, well, we know it. So it must be. But yeah, so that was the one thing we have had no issues really with rest of world, but with EU it's a bit more difficult.
Yes,
the ones that be low risk and easy to do, often the most difficult to do.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So Brett, let us know if that answers your question. If not, please just use the chat box. Another question from me, Amelia. Sorry, I'm aware of the time. So when OPSS started their enforcement, how did that start? Did they just send you a letter, or did
so they sent a letter to our registered office, and it gave us 14 days until our thing, and we called them up, and Lee was on holiday and then I was on holiday, so we asked if we could push it back. And when Deanna came in, she then said they anticipate that most people will push them back, so they give them a 10-day sort of
10-day window after the date.
After the date that they expect you to receive it, which is often about 2 weeks after they send it. And then they say that they can push it back. So say our one was meant for the start of the month, we pushed it back to the end of the month. I think they often imagine you'll push it back 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. Right, thank you. Any other questions for Amelia and Lee from DHH? No? Okay. Again, thank you. That was an excellent presentation and examples.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And next we have Robbie from Tradelink. Robbie is also a very experienced expert when it comes to Brazil, and also when it comes to demonstrating compliance to OPSS enforcement. Robbie, just before you start, just let me just quickly add 2 things. Number one, I want to say that the example Lee and Amelia just demonstrate to us, the reporting, as we said yesterday, you can create your own template. It can look like anything, as long as just making sure that you cover the component, very key and mandatory component of UKTR due diligence, which you can find in the OPSS or the TTF reporting template. Just make sure you have that, and then you should be okay. And then secondly, stakeholder consultation. And Amelia mentioned about NEPCOM, and today on the panel we have SPOTT. So Maggie from and Annabelle from SPOTT team, as well as Grace from BVRio, and Mary and her colleagues from Open Timber Portal. They are all very helpful and expert in their own countries. So feel free to ask questions and contact those agencies as well. Right now, allow me to pass the floor to Robbie. Robbie, are you ready?
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
I apologize for the, well, I had to put it together in a very short notice, the report, but what I'm going to be doing is focusing mainly on practical due diligence and not just the document due diligence, which I'll come to the end of how we presented to OPSS in an audit. We've been audited 3 times before, all on Brazil imports, but I'll cover that when I come to an example. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So you should see, yeah, so this is basically just an example of how we do and what we're focusing at the moment in in Brazil. So, okay. So we are based up in Belém in the state of Pará. It's the capital of the state. It's a massive size, probably almost about 5 times the size of the UK. And it's a major port in the region for export of tropical and also now plantation species, Parica, eucalyptus, teak being shipped out of that region as well. So we have a large factory just outside of Belém in an industrial area called Ananindeua, where we have about 150 workers, and we that's where we really base all our Brazilian operations. I lived there for 13 years running the factory, and from there really traveled a lot around in the region, in the state of Pará and other states as well. So basically most of what I'll be showing you here is what we do for sourcing our raw material for the products we make in Brazil, being flooring. We do a lot of solid hardwood flooring for mainly the United States market and North America. So we have large automated production lines there making the flooring. And decking, of course, is a very important product for us. We've just now made a large investment and put in a new automated decking line. And yeah, so for us, what does due diligence mean, and how do we really adhere to the main legislations of LACI Act and EUTR and UKTR, where of course the onus is on the operator or the importer to do the due diligence, and of course our respective directors, where we have to show due care and due diligence. Of course, we focus on implementing consistent due diligence for risk assessment, and of course to avoid placing illegal timber on any of the markets. And there, of course, are 3 main elements of our due diligence, which is the information gathering process, risk assessment, and then subsequent risk mitigation. We focus a lot on transparency with a lot of stakeholders, including competent authorities and NGOs at all levels. This is just a quick snapshot of stakeholders that we have direct communication with in the past, or if it's ongoing, or if it's just sporadic at the time that we need information. So we really take time in making contact with stakeholders across the supply chain. So of course, we find best due diligence is visit your suppliers regularly and have them visited by high-level management. We do not deal with agents. We do everything ourselves. We have our own team in Brazil. We have our own procurement managers. I myself am regularly visiting Brazil, visiting our supply chains, visiting our suppliers, visiting our suppliers. And of course, this all includes relationship building with our suppliers over a long period of time. So we have a record of that as well to show that this consistent buying from only, let's say, we've reduced our supplier base because of this. So there again, we have knowledge there with using the local input, using local auditors, legal and trade help as well. Of course, we are lucky that we don't have a language problem, because we have our own team there. I myself as well is fluent in Portuguese, and we understand the loopholes. So that's why I really got into the due diligence side, is because knowing the supply chain, you see where the people can take advantage and get through or cut corners, and it's just easier really to focus on the loopholes and see if the suppliers are trying to cut corners. So it's just easier for us, because of course there are systematic fraud, let's say, techniques that is then of course easier identifiable. There again, I said we use in addition to our own people there, we use a third party forest engineers to do field audits and document desktop studies as well. Make sure you record everything, screen captures, make sure that everything is filed and properly and easily accessible. cloud storage is making things, of course, much easier now. And of course, when you get audited, if you show consistency and transparency to OBSS, even if you might not have all the due diligence done, and let's say you've maybe skipped or have shown that something isn't it hasn't been done in a certain supply chain audit, if they go back and see that you've done consistency in your audits, then it definitely helps a lot. And of course, understanding what each type of risk means, because there's plenty of risks, but if we don't understand, then of course our risk mitigation can't be applied appropriately. And of course, updating our DDS frequently, as every 6 months, every 12 months, do review and just make updates, record these updates so that you can show that you are making changes and improvements to your due diligence. I'm going to focus on where we focus our supply source from. So in Brazil, you have basically two types of forests. You have private forests, which are your your management projects. And for the past, let's say 7 to 8 years, there's been a massive drive and pushing for concessions. And there are two types of concessions. There's federal concessions, which is overseen by the federal IBAMA and the Brazilian Forestry Service. And then, of course, you get state level concessions. These are concessions that are tendered for by local companies. You have to be a local company. You cannot be an international company. And the contract is signed to the tender winner for about 40 years. And they have the right to extract from these concessions. And of course, each concession has to go through the proper project managements. And you can also have them certified if you want to as well. So in the state of Pará, those are just some a breakdown of the federal and state concessions within the state. There's approximately about 1.2 million hectares in the state of Pará that's under concession. And we just find it's the most vertical supply chain compared to the private forests, where we've seen are the areas that more risk is and more fraud is prevalent. This is an example of a large concession area. It's the Altamira in the southwest Pará. It's what's over 200,000 hectares of concessions. And this is actually split up between two concession holders, which we buy from. So about 70% of our raw material is coming from this concession here. These are concessions that, like I say, each area is then detailed and then split up into highly detailed inventory and harvesting areas. Each little area you see there is an area that they go in during the year, and then they would then do a project management in each area and have a harvesting plan for each area as well. So taking just, for example, one area, you have a full inventory of trees of every single species, every single tree is mapped, is geolocated, and then a harvesting plan is developed on that. So it's extremely detailed. If we ever have to go down to stump level, and we have this information for us as well, if we send our forest engineer in and we want to do some sample testing to the stump, we would then, let's say, select 10 trees that were given to us in a chain of supply that was used for our factory, and then we would go right down to stump to check if the tag is there. To give an example of how the forest, how these sustainable concessions work, it's quite incredible, because in let's say in a harvest area, which is typically about just over 2 hectares, you have about 800 individual trees of various species and various diameters. Now, when you harvest, you're really only going to harvest trees that are wider, greater than 50 centimeters in diameter, and of course are commercially viable. And when you break that down, it literally looks like that. So of that area, the trees that would be harvested, literally about 6 to 8 trees that were larger than 50 centimeters and are commercially viable. So the result of that is, you see, these are my photos taken from a drone. You'll see at the bottom part of the image, We are there just, that's an access road. This is a forest that has been harvested already and will not be touched for the next 30 years. This as well, this is an area that has been harvested. That as well, that's been harvested. And you'll see in why we push this narrative so much, with this being a solution to the region, not just for the environment, but on a socio-economic level, is because that is happening at the same time in the region where you have soya farming, where they don't need forests, they don't need trees, but it's massive, powerful lobbies with a lot of money really dictating what is used for the land. That's a cattle ranch. So there again, we see the vast difference in what sustainable forestry does to the region. These are just photos of myself visiting the concession, taking note of stump tags and checking log documentation from the forest to the mills. We also do due diligence on working conditions of the laborers in the forest. As you can see, this is the base camp of one of the large concessions there. They have, so we would do then a checklist of working conditions. It's all part of our, also the MSA, which we check as well, but we definitely not only look at the forest, but of course, the social aspect of the harvesting. So they have a full-on office with forest engineers where they plan the harvesting. They have internet via a satellite. And then I'm just going to speak a little bit about the new system in Brazil, which a lot of people are not aware about, that on the 26th of January this year, the Brazilian federal government introduced the Pau Brasil platform, which is the new system that is used to integrate all the state transport, literally from your origin through to your harvest, through to your factories and the transport documents, and also the manufacturing side. So this is the new system that's just been implemented and is emitting you'll see, just going back there, the most important document there is your LPCO, which is basically your export authorization given by the federal IBAMA for the export to take place. So if your timber from Brazil has got the LPCO, it is legal and it has had its chain of custody verified. So it's, like I say, it's a single service platform that's integrating all the licenses and authorizations, so that they can check and make sure that the export can take place. So that's just a breakdown of how the system is registered. Like I say, the LPCO acts as your export authorization, and is now basically on a common platform. It used to be the DUE and export authorization, but now, like I say, your main document requirement there is the LPCO. That's just basically the documents we look at different levels. At your harvesting level, we're looking at your forestry guides, your GF1s, your log transports, and all the way from forest to the port of export. Okay, I'm just going to give you an example of an audit, how I presented the audit. Let me just quickly. Right, can you see that document?
Yes, Robbie.
Okay, so I set it out here so that the OBSS auditor can know where the documents are fitting into the whole chain, literally from a forest level all the way to the export. So it just makes them clearer for them to see. And there's a lot of documents here because this red box I've put is really, according to Brazilian legislation, what is our legal obligation. Myself, as Tradelink Madeiras, our factory, we're only legally responsible to show one step back from where we bought the wood, which would be from the sawmill, and they're the corresponding documents from the sawmill. But what we do, we go all the way back. We gather documents and we do due diligence and checks and audits on our supplier's supplier, which is basically the forest. And there I have links in this PDF where, let's say, you click here and you'd get, so that we'd have a, can you see that page? Did it open a new page?
No, not the new.
Hold on. Oh, I have to make sure I share. There, can you see the?
Yes. Now we can.
Okay, so here basically on the right you'll have the forest, and it just moves along to your DVPF1, which is your harvesting license for the logs, GF1, which is log transport, our supplier, his invoice to us, all the way to our factory, and all the way to the left, which is the export volume of 20 meters of flooring. And then each of these main documents is a link. So if you click on, let's say, the field audit on the far right, which we did on the forest, let me know, is it opening up a web page?
Yes.
Yes, so there we go. That's my field audit done by my forest engineer on that particular forest. He's done sampling. We've done satellite checks. We've checked that the forest was harvested in a sustainable way, that it wasn't just clear cut. We would do then sample checks on logs to see how the filling was done. Check the stumps, the stump tags, do geolocation on the stump tags. So that's the audit. There again, like I say, there again, if I click on any other document, let's go on the middle here, the GF3, which is a transport document of rough sawn timber. There again, these are all verifiable and authenticatable documents that I can check on the system. I can put in the barcode for this document to make sure that it is authenticate, and I can validate it. So, and of course, I'm not going to go through all the checks, but of course, there are certain checks we do on these documents as per our checklist. So let me just go back to this over here. So each forest, which is called an OUTF, that's your harvesting license, I would then have respective documents, Ministry of Labour checks, the Federal Public Ministry as well checks on those, all the certificates here. So let's click on the Ministry of Labour. That would then open up a certificate to say if there were any problems with, you see there's negative, no occurrences of labour problems. And I have that for every single stakeholder in the chain. I would have checks on the Ministry of Labour, checks on the local state environmental agencies, all the way through. So there we have our invoices, and of course we have the export documentation as well, the bill of lading, the tally. That's all accessible. So it's just easier for OPSS when they get this whole bunch of documents from me. They know where in the chain those documents are fitting in. We've got, let's say, satellite imagery audit, which we've done via a third-party partner of ours, where we've checked the forest over a period of time. So we go back, let's say 10 years ago, where it was untouched. 2014, they might have started operations, and basically it's a time frame, and then up to 2017, where we've seen traces of forestation and harvesting done in that period. What we don't want to see is that it's been harvested, let's say 10 years ago, and today hasn't been touched. So those are all, let's say, tools for us to highlight any red flags that need further mitigation or might need a field visit. So yeah, so like I say, I'm not going to go into the details, but that's how basically we present to OPSS a diagram like this, and then we will populate it with the respective documents.
Thank you so much, Robbie. That's very comprehensive. Wow, to the way you organize information, be able to present it in such a clear and organized way. So we have, I think, 3 questions for you, Robbie. So number 1 from Philippa. There seems to be campaigns by NGOs that eucalyptus, even from a plantation, might be high risk because it is regarded as a tropical species. Does this apply even if it comes from a part of Brazil that is not in the tropical line, but from the Atlantic forest zone?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can tell you now, my due diligence that would on pine or eucalyptus or a plantation species in Brazil would literally be 5 minutes, because it's not high risk. There's never been any reports done on eucalyptus illegal logging. Eucalyptus is basically a crop in Brazil. It's like wheat. It gets planted, it gets harvested. I would rather focus my due diligence on a company level, on a fiscal level, to make sure that the company has got no problems with the Ministry of Labor, that there's been no, let's say, company fraud. But I can tell you on a species level, there would be very, very low risk, like Amelia said as well. I completely agree. Plantation species in Brazil are very low risk. I would rather focus my due diligence on, at a company level on, let's say, if the company's had any problems with the Minister of Labor, or any, let's say, under invoicing. That's normally a risk in Brazil as well, where a forest might send eucalyptus logs to a sawmill and they might under invoice it to pay less tax. That is a risk for sure. But in terms of species, I can tell you with my experience, almost zero risk there with eucalyptus or teak.
Thank you, Robbie. I just add to that, I think there are already quite a few official references that does say the plantation material, literally the species exported from Brazil, if that is from a plantation in Brazil, the risk of illegal logging is quite low. However,
Very low.
yes, the full risk of, yes, due diligence do need to be carried out. And another question for you, Robbie. Do you do this level of due diligence checks for both plantation and tropical species?
No, definitely not. We, like I say, we are limited by resources and time and people. That's why we will concentrate those on the high risk, which is tropical. For plantain, we do buy plywood in the south of Brazil. We focus more there on actual visits to the mill regularly by our people in Brazil. So let's say 3 or 4 visits. Negotiations are done as well in a high level, just managers to managers. Like we do not use agents. There's no, like I say, it's more of a document desktop audit than having to go and visit a plantation, which might be done once in the beginning of the negotiations, but there's no necessity to keep on visiting. It won't change anything, but we will just go through a basic checklist on documents before export that everything is okay.
Okay, that very
Where
clear.
tropical is definitely as an ongoing boots on the ground situation.
Okay. Again, one more thing to add. There is also a European EUTR competent authority position paper on Brazil, which again listed a list of risk criteria and recommended mitigations for the national forest part from Brazil. Again, that we can share.
Yeah, I think one of the main things there they've said is that they really want to focus that people use third-party auditors to check. So I would recommend that, even though we have our own forest engineer who goes to check forests, that might not be accepted by the EU, because they'll say, well, there's a conflict of interest. You're basically auditing yourself. So, but we still insist on having our own people and own forest engineers visiting forests. We do add third-party checks as well, definitely. So I would definitely recommend that. I think, and I would also recommend that buyers visit their suppliers. I think Brazil is not a place that you can just do business. I'm talking about tropical, not plantation. That you can do business over the internet and assume that you won't have any problems. I think that's taking a bit of too much of a risk.
Okay, right. I'm conscious of the time. Just maybe last question from Sonia. Anything you could share, Robbie, on any examples of loopholes or detectable fraud in Brazil?
Yes, I think when you have there's quite transparent when you can check. We've often seen that when we look at the forest space, the forest harvesting document, which is called the OUTF, we do checks on the forest engineer who was responsible, let's say, who actually audited the forest on behalf of the supplier and submitted the audit to, let's say, IBAMA or to SEMAS, which is the state environmental agency. When we've done checks on the forest engineer, we've seen that there are several cases involving that forest engineer where there might have been forest fraud. That's a massive red flag for us, something some people might have picked up before, that the forest engineer has been, let's say, systematic and repetitive in cases involving forests. It's normally the private forests that let's say have been have exaggerated the amount of credits in valuable species. So definitely look out for high levels of IPE in the forest, or let's say if you find a forest and they've got high levels of the most valuable species, IPE kumaru, jatoba, masunduba, whatever, that's a red flag that you need to, let's say, do a field visit and then check if it really is that highly concentrated in the forest. So definitely a loophole is, let's say, exaggerating the volumes of high value species in a forest.
Okay, very clear. Thank you, Robbie. I think we need to stop here for a quick break. Before we go, Robbie, there's one question for you from Eva in the Q&A. If you have a moment, do you mind typing your answer for that question for Eva? And for anyone else, we will have a 10 minutes break and we will come back at 12:30 for the presentation from SPOTT, BVRio, and WRI Open Team Reporter. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. Thanks, Robbie. Great presentation as well.
Thank you.
Moi, je connais pas l'agence de voyage, promise. Je ne connais pas l'agence de voyage. Je ne connais pas l'agence de voyage.
Hi, Maggie. Are you or Annabelle who's going to present first?
Hi,
Hiya.
it'll be me.
Hi,
me start.
Annabelle. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just one moment. Ship at 12:30. Right, let's now make a start. Hello, everyone. Hope you had a nice 10 minutes break. Let's now move on to the second session of this workshop, where we will be seeing our 3 partners and lovely Maggie and Annabelle from SPOTT team at ZSL, who will be sharing with us how SPOTT can be used to help with UKTR due diligence and go beyond. Over to you, Annabelle and Maggie, when ready. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can see that, shout if not. Okay, great. Thanks very much. I'm Annabelle. I'm the Sustainable Business Project Manager at ZSL, and I oversee the SPOTT assessments, and I'm joined here with Maggie, who will be presenting the second half of the presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Fitzherbert. I'm Advisory Manager in the Sustainable Business and Finance team at ZSL, and I give technical support to companies and banks on their sustainability policies and practices. Back to you, Annabelle.
Thanks. So I'm going to give a quick overview of SPOTT and how we assess companies, and then I'll hand over to Maggie, who will talk through some of the indicators that can be used for due diligence, as well as how to report to enforcement authorities if using SPOTT data, and finally some other ways that SPOTT might be helpful. So SPOTT is an initiative by ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, which is an international conservation charity with its headquarters in London. It consists of 3 directorates, so it has its zoos, a science directorate and a conservation directorate, and that's where SPOTT was started. People don't often know that ZSL does conservation work, but as a conservation organisation, we have various projects tackling the drivers of biodiversity loss, and SPOTT was set up to target tropical commodity production as one of these main drivers. So the primary aim of SPOTT assessments is to provide a measure of a company's transparency, as we consider transparency to be a vital first step towards sustainability and to be able to hold companies to account. So SPOTT stands for Sustainability Policy Transparency Toolkit. It's a free online platform which assesses the transparency of more than 200 of the world's most significant palm oil, timber and pulp, and natural rubber producers. It assesses companies against 10 environmental, social, and governance categories, looking at their public disclosures around their policies, operations, and practices. And this data can be used by a range of different stakeholders, such as financial institutions and supply chain companies, to inform investment and purchasing decisions. So, for example, financial institutions can use the data to assess risk areas in their portfolios and as part of their due diligence procedures. Assessed companies can use the data to understand best practice in their ESG reporting and benchmark their progress against their peers. Supply chain companies can use the data to verify their suppliers and inform their due diligence processes. And civil society groups and other stakeholders can identify weaknesses and opportunities for collaboration within these industries and ultimately push for better practice on the ground. So SPOTT assesses 100 palm oil companies, 100 timber and pulp companies, and 30 natural rubber companies. These are mostly producers, processors, and traders, but the rubber assessments also include manufacturers. And our next data set will be the timber and pulp assessments, which are due to be published at the end of July. So these assessments for each commodity take place annually. The assessments are conducted by a team of assessors, and does not involve companies reporting to ZSL. However, the companies do get a chance to feed in. So we review companies' publicly available data to create a draft assessment before sending this draft to each company for their review and feedback, should they wish to. And this time allows for companies to make further public disclosures or updates before the assessments are finalised and published. So the assessments consist of around 180 indicators spread across these 10 ESG categories. And the indicators consider the public availability, quality, and scope of policies, commitments, operational data, and reporting of activities undertaken by companies. Some indicators will have a higher score where there is some evidence that the data has been externally verified by a second or third party. However, it's important to note that SPOTT itself does not do verification of a company's reporting, and that a high score reflects a company's relative transparency rather than its sustainability. So while SPOTT looks at reported implementation of policies, it does not score the effective implementation of policies on the ground. So if you go to the website, you'll find the company scorecard, which ranks all of the assessed companies for each commodity with a higher score, representing that a company is being relatively more transparent when compared to others with lower scores. And if you click on the company name, it will take you to its full assessment. You can see company profile information as a breakdown of scores in different ways, for example, by ESG. And each assessment contains detailed explanations and evidence supporting each score. So if you click on the source link, this will take you to where the information has been reported by the company, such as a sustainability report. We also include a media monitor, which gathers media stories relating to the different ESG topics covered in the assessments. So the media stories are flagged within the assessments under each category. And these stories are not scored as part of the assessment, but they are available to view alongside the assessments as a way to provide context on implementation of policies and infer risks associated with reported operations on the ground, and can be used as part of wider due diligence activities on a company. There's also the option to create a dashboard account where you can bookmark the companies that you're most interested in, and then access various functions such as being able to modify the score weighting. For example, if you want to weight social indicators above environmental indicators, you can view trends over time, compare indicators for different companies, track trends, and download the full data sets. So this is a really useful tool for anyone wanting to dig further into the data. So SPOTT indicators are classified under 3 different types. We have policy indicators, which are looking for publicly available ESG policies and commitments. We have practice indicators, which look at a company's reporting on its implementation of these policies and progress towards targets. And then organization indicators, which look at a company's reporting of its operations, assets, and management structure. So for example, how much land it owns and where it's sourcing from. And it's these organization indicators, along with some of the practice indicators, which will be most useful for information gathering when it comes to due diligence. So on that note, I will hand over to Maggie, who will go into this in more detail. Thanks.
Thanks very much and good afternoon, everyone. Annabelle, next slide, please. So where does SPOTT fit into due diligence? As Annabelle explained, the scoring relates to company disclosures across the environmental, social and governance themes. And while SPOTT doesn't directly assess companies on legal compliance, you may find it useful in making initial investigations into your supply chains and helping you make sense of some of the information available about a company. So the area that you might find SPOTT useful is probably going to be in the information gathering part of your due diligence system, but there may be some information that relates to the other components of the DDS as well. In a moment, I'm going to show you some of the indicators we assess that might be relevant, but I'd just like to give a little bit more context first. So the companies we assess are all in the upstream end of the supply chain. Most are forest management companies, but we do also assess major sawmilling companies and other traders of raw material. Also, the geographic focus of SPOTT assessed companies is predominantly in the Congo Basin and Southeast Asia, with some companies in South America and East Asia too, namely China. given the local land bank of the spot assessed companies is in the region of 38 million hectares, there's a good chance that anyone who is sourcing tropical timber is going to be sourcing from companies that we've assessed. Some may be sourcing directly from these companies, but in many cases, there's likely to be intermediaries, of course. So a basic understanding of which companies are at the end of your supply chain is therefore a prerequisite to using SPOTT in most cases. But given the high risk nature of many producer countries in the tropics, traceability to forest or forest management company probably already forms part of your due diligence, or at least I hope. Next slide, please, Annabelle. So there's some SPOTT indicators that simply ask whether or not a company has made basic disclosures relating to their operations. So by looking at the scorecard of a company, you can get a quick yes or no snapshot for information such as whether a company has listed the whereabouts of its operations or the list of countries that it sources from. Or for another example, indicator 22, maps of forest management units. These could be used, for example, to cross-check the locations of geographical information on sales documents, or maybe to help you understand the range of possible origins of material flowing through a primary processor that you source from. It's worth noting as well that on the SPOTT website, when you're looking at the indicator for a company, you can click on the source link and it will show you where to find that information on the company webpage to save you digging around. Next slide, please. So there's other indicators that link to third-party information sources. For example, indicator 27 asks if a company has provided legal documents to the Open Timber portal at the time of the SPOTT assessment. The OTP indicators we use relate to things like contractual commitments that benefit local people or whether forest logging permits have been properly granted. You'll hear more about the OTP in Marie's presentation later, but just to note that the score on SPOTT relates to the score on OTP and is updated annually. We also have other indicators linking to third-party schemes. For example, indicator 48, the percentage of wood from suppliers that comes from FSC FM certified areas. This could be useful, for example, if you have certified product, but you can't verify the certified sales all the way back to the forest. So it could help you understand where in the supply chain a risk of mixing between certified and uncertified material may be occurring. Next slide, please. So last up, here's some indicators that relate to supply chain transparency that could allow you to dig a little deeper. So assessment of indicators such as the proportion of supply traceable to country of harvest or even forest management unit could help you make informed decisions about where to focus your supplier engagement efforts or to benchmark companies against one another regarding the level of visibility that they have on their own supply chains and therefore the kind of information they're likely to be able to provide to you. Next slide, please. So just to highlight again, SPOTT does not do the due diligence for you. It's only a starting point. What SPOTT does is conduct the annual assessments of publicly available information, and it can be used to help better understand your supply chain. What it does not do is third-party verification. And it's also important to note a high SPOTT score does not indicate a high level of compliance, only a high level of transparency. Next slide. So finally, here's a few other ways that we know that businesses have been using SPOTT. So things such as enhancing raw material sourcing policies, comparing certification targets, identifying priority areas for engagement, comparing suppliers against one another, supporting your responsible sourcing policies, and to review your own sustainability goals in relation to what's going on upstream. Next slide, please. So that's it from us, a very quick overview. I think we probably don't have time for questions now, but certainly would be welcome any follow-up conversation if anyone wants to hear more about it or have some direct support on using the tool. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back over to Zhao.
Thank you so much, Maggie, Annabelle. That's very a quick and clear presentation. Any questions from anyone, please feel free to send it to Maggie and Annabelle directly or use the chat function in Zoom. Let me now introduce Grace from BVRio. Bye, Maggie. Bye, Annabelle. Thank you. Hi, Grace. Yes, you're here.
Hi, Joe.
Are you ready to share your screen and tell us a bit more about what does BVRio do and how?
Yes, I will. Okay, let's just work out this screen sharing. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm Grace and I'm from BVRio, and I'm going to add to the people that have been talking about sourcing timber from Brazil. So before I start, I'll just give you a little bit of background about BVRio. So we're a non-profit organisation. Let's just minimize that. Non-profit organisation with the mission to design and promote innovative market-based solutions for the benefit of the economy, the environment and people. We were founded in 2011 in Brazil, and we now operate internationally. So I'm based in our UK office, which is in Oxford. I lead the Forest and Land Use Programme, and one of our aims is to promote the trade in legal, certified and sustainable timber through the creation of responsible markets and due diligence tools. So talking about timber from Brazil, well, as other people have mentioned today, but also as I'm sure you've seen in the news and in reports over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about deforestation in Brazil's Amazon, about illegality in the timber sector, and a lot of reports have been produced. And in fact, as I think João mentioned earlier as well, the conclusions of the competent authorities in December 2020 were that insofar as imports of species harvested in natural forests in the Brazilian Amazon basin are concerned, operators should generally consider the level of risk of illegality as non-negligible unless adequate risk mitigation measures have been taken that demonstratively reduce the level of risk to a negligible level. So what they're saying basically is that timber from Brazil does fall into the high risk category. So you need to do a high level of due diligence. And a quick overview of some of the risks you get from importing timber from Brazil are there are risks of illegal logging and timber theft, risks from documentation fraud, and risks of operational illegalities and or irregularities. So I'm going to talk about these in a little more detail as I work through my presentation. So in Brazil, just to complicate things a little bit, there are actually 3 official systems to control timber production. You have the DOF system, which covers most of Brazil, and then you have a cis-flora system in the state of Pará and a separate cis-flora system in the state of Mato Grosso. So this does complicate things a little bit, but they do generally work through the same structure. So it's just that you'll get slightly different documents. So it's worth knowing where your timber is coming from, where the forest of origin is. So as always, when you're assessing and mitigating risk, you need to look at the whole supply chain from the forest of origin through to where it's being processed, over to where it's being exported from, all the way to you, the importer. And there are various documents that you can get and you should be asking your suppliers for when you're thinking of buying timber from Brazil, that you can get and analyze to do your due diligence. So one of the main documents you need is a timber extraction permit. This is known as an ORTEX, but it's also known, just to complicate things, as an ORTEF in the states of Pará and Amazonas. And the ORTEF tells you various different things. So we've got numbers on the side because I've actually taken some of these documents from a report BVRio has published that I'll tell you about later. So you can see examples of these documents in the reports as well. I think it's really important whatever country you're working in to know what a document should look like. So regardless of the country you're working in, make sure you can see examples from verified sources of other documents of the same type as yours to make sure that the document that your supplier is giving you contains all of the information it's meant to. So on this timber extraction permit, you get things like the name of the forest engineer and their professional registration number and the name of the landowner. So like Robbie said earlier, having the name of the forest engineer is really useful because you can use that information to check to see what their previous activity has been and if there's been any irregularities in their work that might lead you to consider there's a high level of risk for this timber consignment. This document also contains a map which shows the location of where the timber is going to be harvested from. Again, you can use this to gather information from places like Landsat information, satellite images, to make sure that the activities are actually going on where they say they are going on. That's one of the areas where fraud can take place. It's one of the risks of illegality in Brazil, is that people can create these permits for areas that they never intend to log, and then use these permits to launder timber that they've gained from other areas. This document also contains a list of the species and volumes of timber that are going to be extracted from this area. Now, as Robbie said earlier, one of the other risks of fraud is that people can elevate the volume of high value species and record that on this document. So it's really worth checking, particularly for the high value species, but for any species you're buying, check the volumes against published data, see if they're unusually high. And again, if they are, it's a bit of a red flag, you should be investigating further. So then the second lot of documents you need are timber transport authorizations. Every time timber is moved in Brazil, it has to have a timber transport authorization. So one type of document is a GF. These are given for timber being transported in the states of Pará and Mato Grosso. And this contains a lot of information as well. So you've got the type of GF it is, because it's a different GF depending on whether it's moving from the forest of origin to the first processing, whether it's going from processing to export. So it's worth knowing the different types you're expecting. Each GF has a number. That's a useful thing to have to check. You get the names of the dispatching party, the receiving parties. These names are, again, things that you can check. You can Google, see if people have a track record of doing anything that looks suspicious. It also contains the species volume and prices of the products being transported. Now, this is a really important thing, because when you're building your supply chain, you really need to be making sure that all the numbers add up. And I think someone spoke about this earlier, but you need to make sure that the number of logs that are coming from the forest are enough to provide the number of product that you're buying at the end. So you need to be investigating things like conversion factor numbers, the efficiency of sawmills. I think off the top of my head, from converting logs to sawn timber in Brazil, it's about a 40% efficiency. So you need to be trying to calculate to work out whether or not you've got enough logs at the beginning, or if anything is looking a bit suspicious in the amount of timber that's being produced at the end from the logs that are initially going into the supply chain. It's also got the details of the route and the dates of transportation. Again, that's really useful when you're building your supply chain. See where the timber has been moved from and to, and make sure that things aren't being transported before, you know, they've been processed and things. Make sure that the dates all add up. So we also have timber transport authorizations called DOFs, which occur in all of the other states apart from Pará and Mato Grosso. They largely contain the same information as the GF, it just looks slightly different. So I won't go through that again. So I've been through some specific risks you can get from the documents, but in general, as it was said yesterday, it's really important to check the authenticity of documents, check the dates, check the signatures. If there's scans of documents, have a really good look to see if there's any inconsistencies or things that have been slightly altered if possible. Again, as I've said, know what the type of document is meant to look like. So secondly, it's really important to check that your documents all go together logically. You can have a really simple supply chain, which goes forest of origin, single processing plant to the export. And then you can have really complicated. I've seen them that have hundreds and hundreds of little pieces. They've got some timber from here, some timber from here, 3 different forests of origin. So it's really important that you actually put that jigsaw together and make sure that you can form a complete supply chain and that you're not missing any of the pieces. As I said earlier, it's really important that you can verify the number and the volume attributed to a log entering a sawmill with the volume of processed timber that's being made, just to make sure everything adds up. And then finally, you really need to start be checking any environmental embargoes and infractions and compliance with labor legislation of anyone connected to this supply chain. So this is something that BVRio can help you with. So BVRio, we have a due diligence and risk assessment system that it's a big data analysis system. And we're really lucky in Brazil because so much information is publicly available. So what we've done is we've built a database that pulls all of this information in and it automatically updates it. and it can carry out analysis per timber consignment, which is really useful because it means you can check every single amount of timber that you're purchasing from a supplier. We have free to use services that I'm talking about today. We do also have paid services, which I won't go into. So the system's really sophisticated, and it collects a lot of information that's publicly available on the forest units, so the forest management plans and things, and the sawmills that the timber is being processed in. And it's really easy to use, and what it does is it checks your timber transport authorization, so it checks your DOFs or your GFs, and it gives you an analysis, which is a start and a destination map, and it tells you any federal or embargoes and infractions, any labour infractions that have gone along, and it also connects you to a copy of the document that you're looking at, which has been stored in the federal or state databases. So you can check that the document really matches and has exactly the same information as the one that was given to the official authorities. Now I'm going to attempt a live example, but we'll see if it actually works. So if I shut up sharing that one, then I should be able to share this one. Okay, can you see the web page saying Responsible Timber Exchange on it?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so if you go to our website, then you can click on Make Your Due Diligence, and it gives you the opportunity to do this single document analysis. So every timber transport authorization in Brazil has a number on it, and that means that you can type this number, I've got a handy one here, into the box and hit Conduct Single Analysis, and it gives you our analysis. So just to say, the ticks on the left that are in green, they don't say that things are good, they say that the analysis has been carried out. So just by having a quick look, it doesn't mean that this timber transport authorization doesn't have any issues. But if we look on the right, you can see a map, and it shows you the start and end point of where the timber was transported from. So again, this helps you build your supply chain. It helps you see whether or not the timber's been transported directly, or if it's gone on a very strange zigzag route, which again can start adding red flags in the things that you might want to get more information on, or risks you need to mitigate. So then we can click on the information of the seller. The information is in Portuguese, but you can use your various Google Translate functions to find out. And what this is telling us is that someone involved in this timber transport authorization has had some federal infractions in the past. So this is something that, this is a risk that you would have to investigate further to decide whether or not it's something that they're, you know, that's done in the past and they're acting to do better and won't do it again, or whether it's something that's saying that they have a risky track record and it might be better not to be purchasing timber from them. So we also here, we have labour infractions. If there's any information about slave labour taking place, then it will come up there. When there is available information on state infractions and embargoes, it comes up there. So as you can see, it's a very simple tool to use. It gives us a quick check on the track records of the people that are involved in the supply chain. Particularly, I know everyone says Google the names of people, which is great, but if you're Googling names of people that work in a country that speaks a different language, you might not know what results you're getting, whereas our system shows you a really nice way, straight away, that gives you the specific information of the track records of the people involved in your supply chain. So if I just go back to my presentation. Okay, so you can print a sample, you can print a report of the information, which gives it all, and it is dated. So if anything changes, then you can go back and show when you got the document. So as I've said, the report, it gives you details of risks, which you then can follow up. It's important to say, like all third-party assessments, that it's complementary to and can be part of your risk assessment for the UKTR, but it doesn't replace your own assessments. You can use it to build into your assessment, but it doesn't replace it. So our system, it's been used over 20,000 times by 500 users in 20 countries. We get a lot of good feedback from it. It gives people a lot more confidence in the timber that they're purchasing from Brazil. And I think I mentioned earlier that some of the documents had numbers on it. So we've also written a practical guide to conducting the due diligence of Brazil, which is available on our website, which contains examples of the documents, what information is where, what information you should be cross-checking, things like that. So it's a great document just to refer to if you need some information about timber legality in Brazil. We've also made these documents for a couple of other countries. We've got one for Peru, Ghana, Cameroon, the Republic of Congo. And again, they all contain these sample documents and information about what you should be looking for. So they're a really good resource if you're starting to think about buying timber from a new country, then you can use them to help you know what you should be looking for in your due diligence. And yeah, finally, it's been mentioned by a couple of people, particularly Robbie, but I know it's come up in a couple of questions, so I was also going to mention it as well. There's a lot of plantation and timber in Brazil. Everything I've been mentioning is to do with natural forests. It's not plantation timber. It doesn't have much legislation. Regulations vary from state to state, but it doesn't have the same risks that the natural forest timber has. It doesn't have illegal logging risks and things like that. So I would class it in the same way that Robbie said he would class it. It's very low risk level. And that's just a quick comparison for you to show the differences between plantations and natural forests in Brazil. So I think that's everything for now. My contact details are at the end. If anyone has any questions about timber in Brazil, I'm always more than happy to answer them or find someone that can give you that answer. So thank you very much for listening. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but if not, I can also answer questions separately if you type them in the question box.
Thank you so much, Grace. We do have a quick question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you. From Brett. We buy Brazilian products through agents who produce a due diligence report with a negligible risk conclusion and pass it to us when requested. What level of work do we then have to carry out once this is received from that agent? Any recommendations for Brett?
Yeah, so the competent authorities will tell you that the person responsible for due diligence is yourself. It's not a third party. So you need to go through that report. If you just submitted that report and says we've done our due diligence, I don't think it would succeed. I'm sure Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So you need to go through that report. You will probably need to annotate it just to show that you've actually read it, that you agree with the risk assessment, that you've done any mitigation that's suggested. So you just need to do an extra level to show that you've actually looked through the report, that it does contain the information you need and how you're going to use that information going forward.
Thank you very much, Grace. Brett, if you would like to ask any more, any further things, please just feel free to let us know. Any other questions for Grace regarding Brazil? If no, right, I will move on next. But thank you again, Grace, for the lovely presentation. It was very helpful. Thank you. And next, may I please bring Marie, you are here, and Fanso, your colleague. Thank you, Marie. Nice to see you. Please feel free to share your screen when ready. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you very much, Shalma. Let me start with sharing my screen. Do you currently see my slides?
Yes, we can.
A presentation mode now?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Shalma and UKTR, for inviting us to contribute to this event. It's not our first rodeo with UKTTF. We've had the chance to present the OpenTable portal in details in former events, and we have a webinar recorded on our YouTube channels if you'd like the full presentation. So today what we're going to do is a little bit different, and it's a little bit new, and you're going to be the first ones to really have an insight on this work. So first, I'm going to share with you the shorter possible version of the introduction to the OTP for those who do not know the tool. And then, as you said, I'll pass the floor over to Gordian, who is working with us in Cameroon, supporting the outreach to logging companies. And what Gordian will share with you is a few slides that are actually that we're going to use to produce a video tutorial on a deep dive on how to use documentation that you can find on the OpenTable portal to carry out your due diligence in Cameroon on a very specific type of permits, which are the sales of standing volume, also known as vente de coupe. So let me first start with the introduction. For those who don't know, the OpenTable portal is a free and independent web platform, and I've added the link here. And the goal is to improve the access to specific national information on forest management and use, with the overall aim to increase the effectiveness of regulations on illegal logging, including CITES. It's been developed with the support of several donors, and as you've seen, there are several tools out there to support you in doing your due diligence, and they are all complementary to each other. So how is the OTP completing that landscapes of tools? Well, first, the OTP has both geospatial and contextual data on the platform, so both maps and documents. It has company level information. It has 100% of the registered forest producers included, and it brings more documents into the public sphere. That means that, and that's exactly the work that Gordian has been doing in Cameroon together with his colleagues Fridolin and Joseph. We work with logging companies to bring more documents in the public sphere, and it's building on strong local relationship and partnerships. So the information we have on the portal are from 4 different sources. Source number 1, the government agencies in producer country, Ministry of Forest, and I'll detail that in a second. Source number 2, logging companies themselves. They share their compliance documentation, and they have incentive to share because we are ranking them. The more they share, the higher they rank. Third source of information, independent forest monitors, that are civil society organizations that go to the forest and look at what's going on in terms of logging activities and in terms of law enforcement by local government agencies. And based on the facts, on what they see, they produce reports that they then share on the OpenTable portal, and they enter each finding of their report in the OTP so that it adds up into a big database that is searchable and that can be sorted. And the fourth source of information is Global Forest Watch, so remote sensing data. And I'm going to go a bit deeper into that. So from government agencies, from Ministry of Forest, what we do have, we get the list of registered producers that we have on the website. You have a screenshot on the right. And we have the official limits of concessions, so the SHEP files of the forest concessions. From the producer, from the logging companies, we have their documentation that are uploaded to the platform by the companies themselves and that are publicly available. And you can just go and access it. It's all organized in different topics, and it will lead you to the actual documents, including, so these are several examples, and this is what Gordian's presentation will be based on documents, what documents to look for, what to look for in the documents. All the documents you will mention, you can find them, most of them on the OpenTable portal. From independent forest monitors, as I said, we have their reports. and we have their findings. And the findings are organized in a database through which you can then access their full reports, including the evidence, how they documented what they found. And then the remote sensing data, we have tree cover loss, and we have deforestation alerts called GLAD alerts and RAD alerts. And you can see that on the top of the forest concessions. So it's very useful to see if there is any major deforestation event happening in the forest concession you're sourcing from. So there are different features here to help you further analyze that. I'm not going to go into details here. I invite you to watch the webinar that we recorded last time. If you don't find it, just let us know. Something very important for you to know is that there is a whole quality control process on both company documents and on independent forest manager observations. There is, we train them on doing internal quality control, and then we have a first layer of quality control ourselves and the second layer, and then it's often done with the help of local partners who really know very well the context. And on the top of that, we hire from time to time quality insurance consultants whose mission is to track and find any issue that there may be in the data we have on the website. So they are really on this mission to try to find anything that is wrong or shouldn't be here, and they do that. We do that on a regular basis. In terms of geographical scope, we have different data sets, as I mentioned, with different geographical scope. The data from governments, it's only available for the Congo Basin. Data from companies, only available from the Congo Basin, but in the system, we thought that may be relevant to open the possibility for companies outside the Congo Basin to upload documents. So these features are in the system. They are not available now. They are inactive, but it could be open pretty soon. And then data from independent forest monitors are global, and obviously remote sensing data are global too. Just to see that there are many documents in the OpenTable portal, more than 1,200. And what I want to show here is that it's increasing on a regular basis, daily. So what it means is that even if you went on the website in 2021 and didn't find what you were looking for, go again, because there are new documents coming every day. And actually, as importers, you have a strong role in there, because the most efficient way we have to convince logging companies to share their documentation on the OpenTable portal is when you ask them, because you want to see their documents on the OpenTable portal. That works really well. We have teams of consultants locally, like Gordon, Fridolin, and Joseph. However, their work can be very hard if you don't do that also. So you actually have an active role to play in making the whole sector more transparent, and it's really working. We've seen cases where we've been in discussion with the logging companies for 2 years, 3 years without any success. And then the importer asks for documents to be on the OTP. And within 24 hours, the logging companies want everything to be published, and is pushing us to go through the validation process as soon as possible. So it's really, really important. And that's also the amount of data from the various countries from independent forest managers and NGOs. So Cameroon, Congo, DRC, Gabon, and also Ivory Coast, because as I said, the data sets for independent forest managers is global. It means that any independent forest manager from any country could log in and upload information. This is what monitors in Ivory Coast have been doing, and monitors in other countries could do so too. So with this, I'm gonna close this presentation, and I'm gonna hand it over to Gordon. Gordon, if you're here.
Yes, Marie, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. And do you want to share your slides, or do you want me to share? Okay.
I will share the slides myself. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Let me see. Yes. Okay. Just indulge with me for a while, please. Think. Can somebody confirm that you can see my screen? Hello?
Yes.
Can you see my screen, please? Can
Yes,
somebody confirm?
I can see it now. But are you on the slideshow?
Yeah, I am on the slideshow.
Okay. Yeah. Now it works. Now it works.
Now it works. Okay, great.
Thank
you. First of all, I have to start with a series of apologies. I cannot turn my video on right now or my camera on. I've been struggling with internet connection since morning, and yeah, I hope I've tried to solve it. In addition to that, I have ambiental noise here that I cannot really help. But please, if for some reasons you cannot hear me, I need somebody to shout and let me know. Thank you very much. So my name is Gauri Anfanso. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, like Mari just said, Fridolin Chula and Joseph Tebu. They are both based in Yaoundé, Cameroon. We've been asked to support the OTP team in this session and present the practical side of risk assessment with more focus on Cameroon. We also are one of the teams, like Mari was saying, the number of consultants working for OTP in the Congo Basin. So we are one of them as well, supporting suppliers in the Congo Basin to upload their documents on OTP. And by so doing, also supporting transparency within the property sector in the region, which, as most of you would know, is crucial for the successful implementation of voluntary partnership agreements, which I believe you're also familiar with. So that said, let me jump straight into it. Well, I mentioned practical sides of risk assessment, but what we want to say here actually is to identify for you two risks as an example and show to you how you can go about assessing them when it comes to harvesting rights under the sale of standing volume harvest license in Cameroon. So the two risks here really would be the risk that timber was harvested before the official notification of start of harvesting activities, because that is really, really important, that before any concessionaire or your suppliers, before they start harvesting or any forest management activity, they need to notify that and get a document of notification as well from the competent authority. And the second risk here would be the risk that timber was harvested after the expiration date of the harvesting license. So we're trying to look at what are the indicators that the supplier is not respecting the validity period of the license. Yeah. And as I said, the document that we want to look into here is a sale of standing volume license, which in French is called vente de coupe. For short, I'll just call it here SSVL, because just to aid our understanding, but I have to make a disclaimer here that this is not an official abbreviation. So you will not see this in any official document. We are just using this here just to ease understanding. So this is how the document looks like. You would have a look at it a little bit more closely. But before that, just a very brief context about this particular license, harvest license. It is widespread in Cameroon, and between 2011 and 2018, more than 20% of log produced in Cameroon was done under this harvest license type. Yeah, so each timber license or each SSVL license is allocated a specific period, and any timber that is felled out of this period or harvested out of this period is definitely going to be illegal timber. And that's what we try to see a little bit in the next slides. So it is therefore important for me to emphasize that you need to do, when you're doing your due diligence or when you do your risk assessment from timber that is coming from this, from Cameroon in particular, you need to pay attention to the validity period, especially if it's under this particular harvest license. You need to pay attention to the validity period during when the timber was harvested. And the documents that you need for it will be these 5 documents that you have on the screen. We'll have a look a little bit at those documents as we progress with the presentation. These are the ministerial allocation decree, which I've put some French names there because most of these documents will be in French. But Cameroonian documents, official documents, and I hope my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, they are mostly actually bilingual. You see them either French or both in French and English. But what actually we discovered with most of these documents is that they are in French. So it would be very useful if you can have somebody who speaks French within your team actually to understand what these documents are. So we have the ministerial allocation decree, the certificate of SVL, which is known in French as vente de coupe. There's a notification to start harvesting activities, notification de démarrage des activités. And then there is the worksite book itself, which is commonly called the DF10, and then the WABIO. These are the documents that you will need when you want to try to do your risk assessment. Now, Marie mentioned about the open timber portal, and we just wanted to use the opportunity as well. Or, I would like to really kind of support what Marie was saying by encouraging you to visit the portal. We think that it's quite very, very useful, because in a way it's kind of a third-party opinion on the authenticity of the documents that are uploaded there. And so, sorry for that. Sorry for that interruption. So yeah, we would like just to really encourage you to have a look at this portal, and also to ask you as well to support the initiative by asking your suppliers as well to upload documents there, because then you get this third-party opinion about the documents that you find. So most of the documents that I mentioned before in the slides before this one, you would also find them on Timber Portal. Now, just taking a close look at the documents, starting with this ministerial decree, well, an operator who is awarded a double SVL license receive a ministerial allocation decree for a license that looks something like what you have on the screen here. We've tried to take out all the confidential information, but just to give you an impression on what the document would look like. So it's a ministerial decree, which definitely is should have a signature as well, and should have a validity date. And this document also specifies the period of validity. It specifies the location of harvest area and the terms under which the double SVL harvest license operates. Then you have the certificate itself of double SVL license, which is called Certificate de Vente de Coupe, like I said before, down to the field and map the limits of the allocated area. Hello, just for me to know, am I still online? Can somebody confirm that I'm still online?
Yes, you are still okay. Don't worry.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm just not very sure about my internet connection. Okay, so
the
process, all right. Great. So the process is the allocation decree. He goes down into the field, maps out the area that has been allocated, and then applies for this certificate of double SVL license. Yeah. So now this certificate is issued also by the minister in charge of forestry in Cameroon. If the forest entity wishes to continue logging beyond the allocated period of 1 year, which is normally the year that is allocated, they must apply to obtain a new certificate again. In some cases, the entity may exceptionally be granted an extension for a few months by the letter from the minister. So the notification looks something like this, which, like I said, is really, really important to have. Well, the way this actually works is that the operator would normally, once he has already the certificate and the allocation decree has been issued to him, what he would normally do is, or what they will normally do, will organize meetings with neighboring communities around the forest concession to notify them that forest management activities are beginning to take place in that forest concession. And once that is done, then they will have to go to the competent authority, which in this case is the regional delegate, and then they will obtain this particular document, which is also important for you to take note of, to officially ask them to start harvesting activities. And then the worksite books look something like this. Like you see, we'll go to the analysis a little bit in a short while. What this worksite book is just like practical, how can I say, a practical sheet which is kept, which is used in the forest by the forester. It contains the volume, the species that is logged, the volume, the day that it was logged, and so on. So this is quite really, really important document, because that's what the forest manager uses on the ground to do, to register the logs and the species that are being harvested. Then the waybill itself here. Yeah, now just quickly to recall again, the risks that we want to look here, because we are getting into the analysis now. The risks that we want to look here again, the risk that the timber was harvested before the official notification, and the risk that the timber was harvested after the expiration date of harvesting license. Now, let us start, for example, with the waybill to check that the risk of harvesting before to check that there was no risk of harvesting before the notification of startup activities. So I hope you can really see this on your screen. If you're doing your risk assessment and you have your waybill with you, what you want to do is to identify on the waybill the species. Once you identify the species, you identify also the code number, which is on the worksheet that I showed some few seconds ago or some few minutes ago, and I will still show them right now. And then also the line on the worksheet. Now, the worksheet, the code has to match. So in this case, what we have is on the worksheet, we have the code number 35318. So when we look into our waybill, what we see is that the code actually matches. And then the line that we have here, see, this is still part of the DF10 worksheet, or the workbook that they use in the field. The line that is that the species has been registered on the workbook here is 09. So when we have a look at this document, we can confirm for sure that this particular species was harvested, it was properly registered as required by the law. And then, of course, you have the date on the waybill, and you have to make sure that the date on the waybill is not before the date that is on this particular document. That's the worksheet document that you use in the field. Because again, like I said, this worksheet document is the practical document that is being used by the forester. And if on your waybill, the timber was loaded on your truck, before it's harvested, then there is a problem there. So in this our case, we see that the date on the work site book, the worksheet DF10 is was on April, and on the web was on was on the 7th of April, and the date on the web was on the 10th. So this actually looks good. Furthermore, it should be checked that the date of filing on the logbook sheet is not earlier than the date on the notification of startup activities. So the notification it was made actually on the 16th of March in this case, and which is well in advance of the date that has been registered on the DF10 worksheet. In the same way, we check that the notification of the start of harvest activity has been issued after the certificate of sale of standing volume timber. So in this case, what we see here is that the certificate was signed on the 11th of March, and the notification was on the 13th of April. So which actually works well. Now on the second risk, to check that that felling or harvesting was done still within the period of validity of the certificate, we make sure that the date on the worksite book, that's a DF10 book sheet, is not later than the validity date of the certificate of SSBL. Here we see these dates. What we see here is that the harvesting was carried out again on the 7th of April, and the validity of the certificate was on the 31st of December, or it's written as 31st of December. This indicates that the harvesting was done within the validity period. Now, I hope I've been able to give you very, very briefly an idea what it means like to harvest on this particular, under this particular, or what to look for when you are harvesting under this particular license. If you have suppliers in Cameroon, I'm happy to take any questions as we progress. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Renzo. Very detailed and comprehensive presentation. Thanks a lot. And I noticed that Philip had a question in the chat box, but believe that Mary have already covered all. Do you want to, Mary, elaborate a bit more?
Yes, especially because I just realized I did not check the send to everyone, but so my replies were only shared with the panelists, so not that useful. Okay. So I'll answer that live if you don't mind. I'll take the last question actually from Katarina, who said, are there plans to expand these to other regions? The answer is that we plan to expand to other regions as resources and opportunities allow. We started with Congo and DRC back in 2018. We added Cameroon, and then so in 2019, and then we added Gabon and CAR in 2020, and now we've reached threshold of the Congo Basin. So we'll see. What we could do is to expand by allowing logging companies from any country to upload information. So instead of going country by country, we could make the choice not to have all the data sets available at the same time, but more have a modular approach where some of the data would be available so that we gather as much data as possible for you due diligence. So that was for the expansion question. On the two questions from Philippa, these are excellent questions. On the documents, so maybe I'll read the question. So do you chase the companies when the information is out of date? Because I found a lot of out-of-date documents on the OTP. Yes, we do. And that's a very important point on the OTP, that the OTP actually tracks the document's expiry dates. And that's very important because most of the time, the expiry date of a document is not stated on the document itself. It's stated in the forest law that such document is valid for 20 years or 15 years or 3 years. But you can't, as importers, have all the expiry dates, validity period in mind. So what the OTP does is to track that for you. So even if you receive a document from a supplier and you're not sure if it's valid or not, you can go to the OTP and see the expiry date on the OTP, or the expiry date of a similar document from another company to compare the validity period. And on the OTP, the expiry documents will appear in red, whereas the valid documents will appear in green. And yes, we do chase companies. And this is exactly the work that Gordian and his team have been doing in Cameroon. And we have similar teams in Congo and in Gabon and in Central African Republic. And we recently added a feature that send automatic reminders to companies when their document expires. So that should also help. And what usually happens is that a lot of documents expire on December 31st. And so it's not unusual to see a lot of expired documents on the OTP in January, for instance. But yes, from here, we work a lot with companies to make sure that they update their documents. On your second question on documents that are not applicable. So let me find the question. Question 2, why some documents are not applicable and you cannot download, but they show in the list in the website? That's another very good question. So these lists of documents. So what we've done with the OTP is that we've developed country-specific lists of documents based on the voluntary partnership agreement legality grids. So which itself is based on multi-stakeholder discussions in producer countries. So these are very robust starting points for a list of compliance documents. From here, we have one list per country. What it means is that all the companies in one country have the same list. However, some companies can be in a very specific situation. If I take the example of documents related to CITES species, not all companies export CITES species. So a company that does not export CITES species need to be able to say, this document is not applicable to me because I don't trade CITES timber, CITES species timber. So this is why we have this non-applicable feature. Why does it still show on the website? Because there is interesting information for you to check on that. So on the website, each document is represented by a rectangle, and you can click on the rectangle, it opens the document. So in the case of a non-applicable, you still have information that you need to check. There is a reason why, there is a why question mark on the corner. And you need to click on that to see why the company said this document is not applicable, because they have a score based on the percentage of documents they share. And it would be way too easy to say all the documents are not applicable and have a super high score, right? So we want to make sure that when they say it's not applicable, the reason why is still public and can be accessed and cross-checked with other information. So this is why they are still showing on the OTP.
Thank you very much, Marie. I think there's another question from Katrina. How do you fund the work of OTP? Especially there's a lot of verification going on behind.
That's a lot of work indeed. We are doing some fundraising. So we have funding from the UK aid, from the EU delegation in Yaoundé, from Norway, and from the US State Department. So this is how we fund our work. But if importers think it would be valuable to contribute financially to the tool, just let us know. That would be terrific.
Excellent. We will try to share that with the wider network. Thanks again, Marie. Any other questions we have for Marie and Fanzo?
Yeah.
On the OTP?
Can I just take the opportunity just to quickly ask an information that I forgot to mention. So one of the things that we're doing is to facilitate, of course, and to support risk assessment is producing a video or videos of a presentation similar to the one that I've just done right now, so that you can sit at the convenience of your office or wherever you are, and you really have a look at how the risk assessment is being done. We try to identify as well, to give you an idea what kind of risk can exist as well. So please just keep that is still work in progress, still under construction. Once that is done, we will let you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanzo. Happy to share all those very fantastic guidance material you have. Okay, any other questions? Super. Thanks again, Marie, and thanks again, Fanzo, for the fantastic presentation and the explanations. Very useful information. Thanks again. So we are now come to the end of the workshop, the 2-day workshop. Sorry, we are 10 minutes behind. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and thanks to all of our speakers. If I may, if you could If I may ask anyone to give us any feedback about this type of UKTR bootcamp, we will really appreciate that. So any suggestions or comments you may have, please do let us know. Thank you. And that is the end of our UKTR bootcamp. Thanks again. Bye.